1922. A body was found near Kennebec Reservoir between Chappaqua and Armonk in New York State. The body had been shot, found some 6 feet off of the road. The body was unidentified for several days until claimed by the 19-year-old man's uncle. The body was that of Clarence Peters of Haverhill, Massachusetts, and formerly with the U.S. Navy. Peters was shot the night of May 15th or early the morning of the 16th. By May 19th, 1922, a 30-year-old man would confess to the killing. His name was Walter S. Ward of New Rochelle, son of George S. Ward, the head of the Ward Banking Company, which is said to be one of the largest, if not the largest, corporation of its kind in the metro. Someone's got some money in his pockets. Well, why did he do it? Ward would say that he was the victim of a $75,000 blackmail plot set up by Peters and 2 other men. Ward claimed he had been lured to Port Chester Road on May 16th, met Peters there, and was forced to drive to the reservoir. Once there, Ward said that he had been threatened by a gun held by Peters and 2 other men had driven up. Shots were fired, some 8 or 9, according to Ward. At least one of those had killed Peters. The other 2 men were said to be one named Charlie Ross, and the other man was called Jack. Ward would be charged with homicide and released on $10,000 bond, which he paid himself. With regards to the blackmail plot and what that was all about, beyond that it had to do with Ward and his family, as of now, the sheriff is keeping his lips zipped. Allegedly, Ward was hoping to talk his way out of this blackmail plot. Sheriff George Warner would recount, quote, "Ward did not succeed his hope. Instead, he told me, Peters got into his, Ward's, car and shoved a gun against Ward's ribs and told him to drive according to directions to be given by Peters. The route led to the King Street Road on the northern side of the Kennebec Reservoir, to the spot where Peters' body later was found." End quote. So Peters ordered Ward to stop the car. Ward did. Charlie and Jack arrived and blocked the car. Peters kept his gun on Ward as Peters got out of the car and ordered Ward out. Ward shoved his left hand into his rear left pocket and pulled out his own gun, at the same time jumping towards Peters to grab Peters' right hand that held Peters' gun. Peters fired but missed Ward and broke the rear window glass of Ward's car. Ward fired, bullet hitting Peters on the left side of the chest into the heart, lodging into the small of his back. Peters relaxed his grip on his gun and fell beside the road. Charlie and Jack opened fire on Ward, Ward hiding behind his car and returning fire. These were the 8 or 9 shots. Charlie and Jack took off in their car, still shooting at Ward as they left, but no bullet hit Ward. Attorneys for Ward, John F. Brennan of Yonkers and Rabinold Scribner of Manhattan, would put out a statement. I'm going to read everything up until the shooting, as we've already discussed that. Quote, "We have appeared this morning before District Attorney Weeks to make complaint on behalf of our client, W.S. Ward, against a gang of blackmailers. The known members of this gang now at large are Charlie Ross and the man known as Jack. A third member of the gang, known as Pete, now dead, has since been identified as Clarence Peters and has, we have learned, a criminal record and a bad conduct discharge from the Navy. It is not known whether they had other Confederates. These men sought to extort money from Mr. Ward by threats in various forms, including threats of death to himself and his family. Mr. Ward at first tried to quiet them by payments, but finally they demanded a lump sum of $75,000. They set the night of Monday, May 15th, as the limit for this cleanup and getaway." End quote. So then what we already know about the shooting, and they would end saying, quote, "Mr. Ward promptly told the story to his attorneys and laid the facts before the district attorney and the sheriff of Westchester County. We are now directing our efforts to find Charlie Ross and Jack. Mr. Ward was admitted to bail upon a technical charge of manslaughter." End quote. When Peters' body was found, he only had a pack of playing cards, pair of dice, and $1.32 in his pocket. Peters' gun could not be found, but apparently had dropped into Ward's car. So, as already said, Walter Ward is the son of George Ward. Walter was also secretary and financial manager of the Brooklyn Federal League Baseball Club, owned by his father and uncle. Walter married Miss Beryl Curtis of Brooklyn, and he claimed exemption from the draft in 1917 on the grounds that his wife was dependent on his salary. Walter's brother, Ralph Ward, VP of the Ward Banking Company, was also exempted based on the fact that the company was considered a necessary industry. Walter had previously been fined $50 in Jamaica, New York in 1914 for reckless driving in an automobile. What was he going 5 miles an hour? May 23, 1922. So as days pass, we get a little bit more information. The total of the blackmail plot was actually over $100,000. That the 3 blackmailers had already collected some $30,000 in hush money. The $75,000 was additional funds requested. Mrs. Ward, Walter's wife, admits she only heard recently about what her husband has been involved in, but she says she's very supportive. Quote, I am with my husband and I want to do everything I can for him. I have the utmost confidence in him. End quote. The couple have 2 very young children. Why was Ward afraid of information becoming public about him? We still don't know. May 24th, 1922. Well. Ward allegedly drank iodine at home about 6 weeks ago, saved by the family doctor. He had been harassed by the blackmailers for about 6 weeks, so now investigators are wondering, did he try to take his own life because of the blackmailing? Dr. Orville Schell believes the iodine drinking was an accident. Quote, I believe Ward meant to take some medicine to cure a headache. It is very easy to get a bottle mixed in the dark. I have no information that the iodine was taken with suicidal intent. You have to believe a man innocent until he is proved guilty. End quote. Investigation still ongoing also into the missing Charlie and Jack. And a woman, one known in New York cabaret circles as Snap, has been missing from her hotel suite for the last week and a half. She's been looked for some information. Snap was a friend of Peters, the deceased, and the thought is perhaps Snap had introduced Ward to Peters. The lady's got some moolah, and lots of guy friends, it's been said. Saucy. A source revealed that a few days before Walter killed Peters, Walter had wired his dad, George, who was on the Majestic, which I'm assuming is a known ocean liner. He wired asking for $30,000 to meet the blackmailer demands. George wired his son back, saying, quote, not 1 cent for blackmailers, but $100,000 to put them in jail, end quote. A day or 2 later, Walter received a typed letter from a CR, which said, quote, if you do not meet us with $75,000, you will not meet the Majestic, end quote. That's when Walter decided to meet with the blackmailers. It was thought that Peters' gun had dropped into Ward's car, but no, Ward said it had dropped by the roadside and it can't be found. Reports are coming in that Ward likes horse racing and other money games of chance, but it can't be substantiated yet, and it said it would have no bearing on anything anyway. Peters, the gun victim, his parents have questions and concerns. His father, Eldridge Peters, would say, quote, Ward's story looks fishy. I do not think my son could have done such a thing in the time he was in New York. I understand that the blackmailing, according to Ward, had been going on for 6 weeks. My son did not leave Haverhill until April 25th, 3 weeks after the blackmailers started their work. We heard from Clarence from Paris Island, North Carolina, May 2nd, 2 weeks before he was killed. In that letter, he wrote he was trying to enlist in the Marines, but feared that he would not pass the physical examination. The next we heard, he was dead. End quote. Sheriff Werner is sticking with Ward's story, but is still investigating. The attorneys have a large package of blackmailing letters, including one that allegedly says, quote, if you do not come across, we will kill you and the members of your family. Remember, we mean business, and you can't escape us, end quote. So Peters' military career. He was in the Navy in 1919 for a mere 17 days. Most of that spent on trial for a charge of theft. He was discharged for bad conduct, which is equivalent of a dishonorable discharge. He actually had, as his father had intimated, tried to enlist in the Marines April 26th of this year, but was rejected because bad conduct charge previously. May 25th. Oh, kids, we keep pivoting, don't we? Once again, new things come out that make you go, District Attorney Frederick Weeks, sounds like an old friend of the channel, is suspicious of Ward's story of Peters being the blackmailer and Ward killing him in self-defense. Quote, you can say in a most emphatic manner that I am not satisfied with Ward's story of the killing of the alleged blackmailer. Don't think for a minute we have swallowed his story hook, line, and sinker. End quote. Additionally, it's been said that there are 2 women that are thought to be a part of this issue. Walter's wife, quote, you may state absolutely that no woman is involved in this case. The blackmail statement did not in any way involve me. I did not know about the blackmail plot until after the shooting, and I have discussed the matter but very little with my husband. There is absolutely no truth in the reports that I had expected to sue for divorce. My husband and I both regret that we cannot divulge the true circumstances about this deplorable affair. It could be cleared up in 5 minutes were the real story to be told, but upon advice of counsel, we must decline to say anything about it. End quote. What else? Well, state police went out to start its own investigation. When they found Peters' body initially, they had taken photographs of the area. Though there was an alleged gun battle between the 3 men and Ward, there were no signs of a struggle. May 26th. Justice Frank Young orders Ward back to White Plains Jail. He had been out on bail for $10,000 but was ordered back to jail when it was decided that his bail was not adequate. Remember our 2-parter with Harry K. Thaw. Ward's allegedly in the same cell. Anyway, apparently he had a good laugh when he had to pound on the jail door to be let in. That's hilarious. DA Weeks still skeptical. State police still skeptical. Only 1 bullet shell was found on the grounds of the alleged gun battle. The angles for Ward to have shot Peters the way he said he did seemed not possible. Ward had turned in 2 guns to his attorneys, now with the sheriff's office. Apparently he had picked up Peters' gun somehow in the dark. Sheriff said he examined Ward's car, found no indication the rear window had been shot out. Sheriff announced the descriptions of Charlie Ross and Jack coming from Ward. Quote, Charlie Ross, Jewish, young, about 30 years old, good dresser, 5 feet 9 or 10 inches. Smooth face, heavy beard, wavy hair, high brow, blue suit and raincoat, black and white check hat, light collar. Jack, pasty face, 160 pounds, 5 feet 10 or 9 inches, dope fiend, no name, black straight hair, black and white check suit, red coat like Ross and cap like Ross. End quote. Sheriff would comment, quote, I could pick up 25 men today on these descriptions. End quote. Anyway, regarding the guns, Sheriff Werner, quote, the shells of one of the revolvers compare with the shell found on the spot where Peters' body was discovered. The gun supposed to have been used by Peters has 5 shells in the magazine, and that under the trigger has been exploded. This conforms with the story told by Ward that Peters fired 1 shot at him. End quote. But Coroner Fitzgerald is suspicious. Quote, I am not going to hold the inquest until I can get sufficient evidence to make Ward talk. As things stand now, Ward has his constitutional rights in back of him and need not say anything concerning the details up to the alleged blackmail scheme. We are checking up his story more rigidly than ever today to investigate his claim of self-defense. I can say honestly, the whole story does not ring true to me. End quote. May 27th. Well, his attorneys requested an appeal, which was granted, and now he can be released on bond with bail at $50,000. Much higher than before because Ward has become a bit more suspicious. Blood stains were found at Ward's home. At the foot of the steps where the stains were found were car windshield fragments and a playing card that had a fingerprint. The blood-stained stones were sent to a lab. The windshield fragments were sent to a car company to see if it was the same glass used in Ward's car. Still trying to locate and trying to look into a Charlie Ross, the supposed co-blackmailer with Clarence Peters. DA Weeks would say, quote, we are beginning to think that if the corpse had not been identified, we would never have heard from Ward, end quote. The playing card found at Ward's house? Not that of the pack of cards that Peters had with him. The 8 to 10 or whatever shots said to have been fired at the alleged crime scene? Some 15 witnesses who live in the area said they did not hear any shots fired. Not sure how Peters was dressed at the scene, but the bullet only pierced his undershirt. So, how when he also had a coat, which appeared to have been hastily put on? Only one shell from a gun found at the scene. Marks of only one car there instead of 2 were apparent. So, of course, with the blood at Ward's house, people are thinking that Peters was killed at Ward's house and then moved. What we still don't know? Why? What was the secret Ward wanted hidden? And was a woman involved? So how did Ward even know Peters to begin with? Peters, not well dressed, relatively young. The millionaire Ward, 30 years old and obviously well-to-do. From the Washington Times, May 29, 1922. Quote, Ward's weird acquaintance with 19-year-old Clarence Peters was carried on and came to dramatic fruition amid the curious atmospheres created in a strange, secret circle of poor youths and men of wealth. A circle dominated by a forceful, piercing-eyed man known as the Wolf, end quote. You're thinking perhaps there's some nefarious activities? Yeah. Prudish newspapers of this day won't just outright say it, not afraid to show you pictures of dead bodies, but discreet about most everything else, if there is something to be discreet about. An anonymous man would say that he knew Peters, and that Peters was well set up with a wealthy man connected with the New Rochelle police force. Ward used to be the police commissioner of that force until all of these shenanigans went down. Of course, we got theories coming out of the Tookus. One of them is that Ward had known Peters since possibly the summer before, that they had some sort of quarrel, perhaps over Peters asking for money or Ward suspecting Peters being part of a blackmailing ring. Police continue to believe that Peters was not killed where the body was found. May 30th. Apparently Ward is not unknown, allegedly, to blackmails. A band of Pittsburgh blackmailers used a young woman to bait a trap for Ward until a friend of his bailed him out of the mess. This happened in 1915. A woman had brought about a damage suit against Ward for $10,000. The young lady was a daughter of a former Major League Baseball player. Ward was secretary of the Brooklyn Fed League baseball team. The young lady and Ward were in each other's company frequently when in Pittsburgh. Allegedly, her wardrobe and pocket money were provided by Ward. Dad George heard about Ward's paramour, ordered the lad home, and removed him as secretary of the Brooklyn Ball Club. I think Ward did go home and then went right back to Pittsburgh. Supposedly, this blackmailing gang got a hold of the young woman, laid out their plans, and she agreed to bring the damaged suit with the help of some court guy who had ties to the blackmailers. Ward consulted a friend who happened to know the young lady and the blackmailers, and he fixed everything with a $1,000 cash payment. That ended that fiasco. Apparently, the woman, a Miss Kendall, would come out in present day at this point in time and say if the police or the prosecutors wanted to have a chit-chat with her, she'd be happy to oblige, that she knows a few things. To my knowledge, she never gets brought up again. There are, of course, theories that Ward left his home that night in his car, but at some point switched to a different but similar car. Police still think that Peters was killed somewhere else and brought to his final resting place. If that's the case, they want the car that would have brought Peters there, as there would be bloodstains. I guess there weren't any found in Ward's actual car, hence the theory of a similar car being used instead. May 31st. Ward's home is being thoroughly searched just now. Why just now, I don't know. Apparently this was prompted by a story in the New York Journal that said Peters was killed and another wounded by Ward in his own library. Sheriff Warner conducted a 2-hour search and would only say, quote, "We found nothing to substantiate the story," end quote. However, apparently they will search all Westchester County hospitals for the alleged second wounded man, and a fingerprint expert/criminologist is back at the Ward house with a case of the lookarounds. There's a lot going on June 1922, but a lot of it doesn't come out to anything. The missing second blackmailer, Charlie Rouse, was thought to be found, but not. Several people were found that spoke of Peters as being unclean and slouchy. DA Weeks revealed his working with the famed Pinkerton Detective Agency, but will not say what they found. Ward and his defense team continue to not make any statements. A man named Cunningham was found who apparently had been a witness of some sort to the library shootout. He didn't see it, but he heard about it from the two men blackmailing alongside with Peters. He would get locked up and his information did not seem to be credible. However, he would say it was Ward's father being blackmailed by the Peters and the other two guys, possibly over an affair George was allegedly having with a lady. Ward was the go-between. Ward went to the jail that Cunningham was in. Cunningham recognized Ward and spoke to him. Ward denied knowing him. Witnesses are being gathered for the grand jury to see if there's enough evidence to go to trial. Mrs. Peters would say that her son Clarence had never been in Ward's home. Prosecutors want to see Ward and George's bank books to see if Ward's history of being blackmailed was true, and subsequently Dad, George, bailing him out. Helen Blanchard has come forward to say she saw Ward and Peters quarreling in front of Ward's home either the afternoon of May 14th or May 15th. June 9th, subpoena servers are on the hunt for George Ward and Ward's brother, Ralph. The whole theory about the Peters killing being done at the house not really being pursued much now. They got a hold of Ralph by June 13th to testify before the grand jury, although he wouldn't actually say anything. Dad George, AWOL. June 15th, grand jury would uphold the indictment of murder. Justice Morshauser would start a separate John Doe inquiry against George and Walter. Ralph could evade testifying before the grand jury, but not in front of the justice. So what was the inquiry about? From the Evening World, June 15, 1922. Quote, it recited that Walter Ward had made a self-serving statement regarding a homicide, in which he set up the explanation, but no proof, that he had taken the life of Peters because his own was being threatened by Peters and two others. It recited that counsel for Walter Ward had exhibited copies of radio messages sent by George S. Ward to Walter Ward, indicating the elder man had been informed a blackmail demand had been made. It also recited that at a time when the necessity for obtaining the evidence of George S. Ward for this grand jury became apparent, George S. Ward had gone to Pennsylvania with his son Ralph, and in the public prints had been quoted as saying he had no intention of coming back while his son Walter was under investigation. It recited that Ralph D. Ward had refused to divulge what his father had said regarding the case. End quote. So now, with this inquiry, it's considered a crime if Ralph does not divulge what George said to Ralph. Ralph would comply, though we would not know what he said. Supposedly, this allows for the law to extradite George back to New York from Pennsylvania. June 16th, Ward has been arraigned, pleading not guilty. What Ralph said would come out a bit. Basically, Ralph backed Ward's story, but said that Ward had been gambling a lot, becoming involved with and in debt to some nefarious people. He kept betting, he kept losing. Then a threat was made to expose a member of Ward's family, threatening Ward and making more monetary demands. Sitting on the doorstep of his house, talking to Ward's relatives, calling him on the phone at all hours. They upped the ante, threatening him the kidnapping of his two children and exposing more members of the family. Tell about Ward's early days and an incident he would want to remain hidden. The night before Peters was killed, they had lured Ward to a place near White Plains. They fired 2 shots at him as he fled. The next night was when Ward went armed, and we know how that ended. Sheriff Werner is trying to find witnesses to that May 14th battle. Based on what detectives could ascertain in following Peters' movements, Peters could physically not have been there on May 14th. Now we have debate on the trial. Justice Morshauser says he has a case that has been waiting for months that needs to go next, and Ward's may not be able to go until October, which would be past Morshauser's term, which ends the end of June, and would have to be handled by a different justice. DA Weeks needs more time to put together the case, maybe until October. There will be no extradition of George to New York as a witness, but they're still looking into conspiracy issues. DA Weeks cannot be the prosecutor for the trial because he was a witness at the grand jury. We'll have a specially appointed prosecutor. June 20th, Ward says if the prosecutors can get him an early trial, he'll tell all. But not before that, of course. Ward's sister, Mrs. Leland Stanford Wood, was called to the conspiracy hearing but provided no information. As she had no knowledge of blackmail plots or Peters' shooting, had not talked with any of it with her father or brothers, and they had not told her anything. What she did know now was from the news. Defense wants the grand jury minutes. Prosecution wants George Ward and will not give up the minutes until he gets George. But by the next day, the defense got access to the minutes and planned to shortly request a dismissal of the charge. Justice Morshauser also had a power play. Weeks either produces the minutes to the defense and chance of dismissal, or Weeks withholds the minutes and risks going to trial July 17th, which is less than a month. Damn Justice M. July 6th. Ralph was asked if his brother was in good health. He would say, quote, "No, I don't think he was. At least, he wasn't normal," end quote. Ralph would also be questioned about conversations he had with Ward during the day on May 15th, the day Peters was shot. He didn't provide anything illuminating, namely that Ward really hadn't told him anything, but that George, their father, had told Ralph the whole story. He refused to elaborate on the advice of counsel that the information he would give would be considered hearsay. July 7th. Weeks is desperate for the testimony of George Ward and Ward's mother-in-law, Mrs. Willard N. Curtis. Both are MIA. Mrs. Curtis had spent the night of May 15th, 16th in the Ward home and was possibly awake when Ward had returned home very early that morning after the shooting. And of course, per Ralph, his father, George, knows everything. July 11th. Former Supreme Court Justice Mills, now with Ward's defense and quite the foil for D.A. Weeks, would say about his nemesis with the grand jury minutes, quote, "I charge that he suppressed the facts that this man Peters was a desperado and a thug. Never since the day of the Spanish Inquisition has a greater outrage been perpetrated than was perpetrated in the grand jury room by the examination of witness by the enemy of the defendant." End quote. Insert your own Monty Python quote here. July 12th. Ward is out on $50,000 bail after being held in jail for 26 days. Indictment still intact. Judge Seeger would say, quote, "It is my judgment that the evidence submitted does not warrant an indictment of murder in the first degree. The state on this end of the case undoubtedly has done its duty, but seems to have overstepped. There appears to be certain evidence favoring the defendant that was not submitted to the grand jury, and it also appears a certain legal evidence has been permitted. I do not think, however, that the circumstances warrant a dismissal of the indictment. The question of fact will have to be properly submitted to a jury upon trial of the action." End quote. July 13th. You know the worst thing about being out on bail? Going back to work and going through all of that mail. Not email, but snail mail. Ward would say, quote, "Gee, it's great to be back, but look at this pile of work. I guess I won't play golf today." End quote. July 23rd. Conspiracy inquiry will continue, though the Ward Council wants it stopped. August 1922. Prosecution's detectives are having a hard time trying to disprove that Ward was being blackmailed. Weeks said that the trial will not happen until he is ready for it to happen. January 2nd, 1923. Good New Year for Ward. Why? Supreme Court Justice Seeger dismissed the charge indicting Ward for first-degree murder on defense's third request for dismissal. Why? Justice said that prosecution did not uphold the defendant's right to a speedy trial. But wait, then another newspaper said that the prosecution didn't have enough evidence. Okay, both technically legit reasons. So DA Arthur Rowland literally just got sworn in for the new year, then turns and says that he had looked at the case and the evidence was decided that with what he had, he couldn't convict Ward on it. Justice Seeger? Girl, same. Seeger ordered the bail to be returned. Justice Seeger, quote, "This motion ought to be granted. This case is old and stale. Under the Constitution, the defendant was entitled to trial long ago. He made application for trial repeatedly. The meager character of the evidence cannot reverse the truth of the statements of this defendant. It was not the obligation of the defendant to prove his innocence, but of the people to prove his guilt. The killing of a man in self-defense is not a crime. I believe the prosecution in this case was diligent and has done all possible. They have had a long time, but were unable to find the evidence upon which this defendant might be convicted." End quote. No evidence. He confessed. But technically that means nothing. Corpus delicti means body of crime. There has to be some kind of evidence aside from the confession that corroborates that the person did the crime. In some states, you can't even hear the confession without that corroborating evidence. From what it sounds like, that evidence doesn't have to be anything major. January 4th. If Ward thought it was all over, well, no. Clarence Peters' parents plan to sue Ward for $100,000 damages. March 2nd. To keep the heat off of Ward, Ward's dad, George, head of the Ward Baking Company, is pushing the baked goods with huge advertisements for their wares, full pagers, including the introduction of Vito-Vim bread. March 29th. William Smith has appeared as a witness, having met up with Peters in Haverhill, where Peters was from, a month before Peters was killed. Quote, "Professor Bill and I wondered who the swell young fellow was who was with Peters early in April 1922. I asked Peters, and he told me his name was Ward, and that he was connected with a big baking concern of that name, which had branches in every city. Peters came around a few days later with a new suit and a roll of bills, and said Ward had given them to him. He said Ward had invited him to go to New York with him. Several days later, Peters said he had got a postcard or letter from Ward urging him to go to New York. He said Ward promised to set him up in a swell apartment and put him in line to make money. Peters told me he wouldn't consent to Ward's proposition. I advised Peters not to go. He told me if I would give him a steady job, he wouldn't. But he didn't belong to the union, so I couldn't hire him. Then he told me he'd go to New York and talk things over with Ward and join the Navy again if he didn't like the proposition. The next I heard of him was that he had been murdered." End quote. Odd, right? Now, obviously, the paper isn't going to outright make any broad conjectures, but you have to wonder, was Ward keeping Peters flush with money and things? Was there a lot more to this relationship? I don't mean just that, but maybe. Or perhaps some sort of underground business dealings? April 5th, 1923. The inquiry continues. This is not a trial, but kind of feels like one. So let's see. State Attorney General Sherman is doing the look-see. Apparently there was an offer made to submit letters gathered from Clarence Peters' mother that accused the Westchester County officials of some malfeasance, including former DA Weeks and current DA Rowland. Ralph Ward continues to refuse to answer any information about what his dad, George, said to him about the case. He said because a year before he had been told by Justice Borschauser that anything George had told Ralph was only hearsay, and Ralph wouldn't have to say what that was. Attorney General would say, quote, "Maybe it was hearsay, but this is not a court, and we want to know what it was your father told you," end quote. Ralph netted that request. Sherman gave up. But Ralph would talk about other things, about how Ward had borrowed several of Ralph's shares of stock in their own company and put it up as collateral on a $20,000 loan. Ralph did not know the particulars, but believed it may have been to cover Ward's betting losses. He had warned his brother to knock it off with the gambling. Ralph did admit exchanging cablegrams with George, who had been in Europe, on whether or not it was advisable to loan Ward some money, between $50,000 and $100,000 prior to the murder of Peters. Ralph would say that his father had cabled yes. But then on the same day, another cable came that said not to give Ward money if it was for blackmail. Ralph never gave Ward any money. May 18th, Lieutenant John McGowan would tell the court that Ward has gone missing. His wife had asked McGowan to go find Ward, and they found him at the Bowie racetrack near Baltimore. He didn't approach Ward himself, but called New Rochelle police. In whatever roundabout way, Ward's brother Ralph met up with his brother and brought him home. May 25th. Well, things seem to be escalating again and trying to take Ward to trial. Again. June 26th. Prosecution wants the Ward family cablegrams and telegrams. Toot sweet, pronto. Ward refused, saying that the authorities had no authority to get those. Basically, Ward nor anyone else will talk specifically about the reasoning of the blackmail. Justice Wagner said that the grounds need to be brought forth by the companies. Will they be brought into evidence? Not known yet. Justice just wants to see if the companies will allow the messages to be produced or not. I don't recall hearing anything about them later, so perhaps not. July 26th. Ward has been re-indicted on a charge of first-degree murder and without bail. Yes, again, Ward pled not guilty. September 5th, 1923. Supreme Court would deny the motion to dismiss the first-degree murder charges once more. We're going to trial. Ward's at the courthouse with his brother by his side. His dad, George, is out of state, staying out of reach of process servers. Ward's wife, Beryl, is having a breakdown in Atlantic City. September 12th, trial begins. Well, actually, we got to select a jury, but anyway. Defense says that Ward's original statement is a tissue of falsehood. State will say that Peters could not have possibly been involved in any kind of blackmail plot. Likely, they will try to introduce Ward's gambling activities and his need for money. Next day, Beryl's at court. Ralph's at court. Great, the gang's all here. Well, not George. State admits their case is based on circumstantial evidence, no eyewitnesses to the crime. The whole Ross and Jack who were there at the crime? Never been found. Some not even sure they ever existed. September 18th. It took longer than they thought, but they finally got the 12-member jury, and the state has started their case. First up, the shirt, vest, and coat that Peters had worn the night of his death. From the Washington Times, September 17th, 1922. Quote, number 1. A bullet hole through Peters' shirt showed the death bullet entered on the left side of the heart. Number 2. 2 witnesses swore the vest was buttoned when the body was found. It had no bullet hole in the front. The hole where the bullet came out in the back was visible. Number 3. The coat showed a corresponding hole in the back, none in the front. Number 4. The bullet which entered the heart coming out the back was not found at the scene. End quote. September 19th. Unlike some trials, this is really just summarizing without saying much detail. Basically, state called witnesses who saw Peters' body as it lay on the side of the road. Dr. Henry Veer, one of the autopsy docs, could not say for certain how far Ward would have had to have been standing from Peters for the kill shot. Ward had said he was quite a distance. State is trying to say it was at close range. Dr. Veer, quote, a man shot in the manner Peters was shot would die instantly. As the shot struck him, he would stagger a foot or two, then his knees would sag, and he would fall to the ground a crumpled heap, end quote. Assistant State Attorney General Thomas O'Neill asked, quote, in your opinion, doctor, would a man shot as Peters was shot be laid out straight on his back as Peters was found, end quote. Dr. Veer, quote, he would not, end quote. And then the defense wanted that response stricken, judge so stricken. September 20th. More witnesses? Nothing really earth-shattering. State troopers who saw the body, railway ticket agent who issued a ticket to Peters. Sergeant Mayo of the Marines stationed at Paris Island said that Peters had been at the island between April 28th and May 14th and was put to work painting. Defense is not above listening in on state witnesses during recesses and lunch and is accusing at least one state trooper of being coached by the prosecution. Kids. September 21st. Defense succeeded in revealing that Peters had a criminal record in Boston for stealing a car. State succeeded in proving that Ward could not have seen Peters in New York City or Westchester County more than 9 hours before Peters would die, thanks to the railroad ticket operators and ticket takers who saw Peters. New Rochelle Chief of Police Frank Cody testified that a pistol Ward had claimed was one that Peters had threatened Ward with looked very much like a revolver that Cody himself had given Ward not long before the killing. Remember, Ward was some sort of police commissioner in New Rochelle. Cody testified that he had taken the gun from a safe before giving it to Ward, but had not been able to trace the number or source of the gun from the safe. The state would read Ward's statement into evidence regarding the blackmail gang shooting at Ward. Sheriff Warner would also mention a verbal statement from Ward where Ward never named the blackmailers. Werner had tried to find the other 2 blackmailers, but never could. September 24th, Beryl went on the witness stand for the prosecution. She testified that the morning after the killing, she first saw her husband between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, when he woke her up. He could have come home earlier than that. D.A. Weeks was called as a witness, the D.A. at the time of Peters' death, but not for this trial, recounting when the defendant came to him 3 days after the murder. Weeks would ask him what kind of gun Ward carried. Ward would say a .38 Savage. September 25th, state rested, earlier than thought apparently, and the defense asked for a dismissal of the indictment. Justice Wagner said, "Nyeh." September 26th, defense rested without submitting any testimony. Ward did not testify. Again, the defense would ask for a motion to dismiss. Nope. Then we got the defense's summation. He pointed out that the state had 72 witnesses for the grand jury, only 32 before the trial jury. State was too afraid to bring out those other 40 witnesses because they would have to be cross-examined and their testimony thus discredited. Defense attorney Mills, quote, "I have been in the case since the first indictment was presented. I am like an old mariner riding the seas. Now he steers for the open gale of the home court, realizing that the opposition contains nothing but wind, nothing but mere bluff at that. Now with every sail set, holding fast and true here in this craft, we are going home safely as we sought." End quote. Nice. Then he plays the pity card, having the jury look at Mrs. Ward, who is weeping, talking about how she stood by her man, etc. Quote, "The state proved for Ward just what Ward intended to prove himself, that Ward never saw Peters until the night of the killing. This proves there could be no malice in the slaying. What has this man done? Let us assume he pulled the trigger a moment too quick for self-defense. He didn't do this in reality, but let us assume it. When he did that, he shot down not a regular blackmailer, but a blackmailer's gunman who had hired himself out for a few dollars. Talk of murder. Why, blackmail is 1,000 times worse than murder. Blackmail touches the lives of women and children, and this man Peters was a blackmailer." End quote. Blackmail worse than murder? September 27th. Prosecution summation begins. AG Carl Sherman would give it, saying that there had been ample evidence to convict Ward, that Ward wanted the jury to believe he had been blackmailed without offering any proof, and wouldn't the jury want to see the letters that Ward said the blackmailers had written to him? The 2 other blackmailers, no one's ever heard of them. That Peters couldn't have been a hired gunman for the blackmailers because Peters had no gun. Quote, "If the state has convinced you that Ward planted that gun, you must believe him guilty of first-degree murder. He killed a man 12 years younger than and much smaller than himself. He said he drove a mile up the road, turned around, and came back picking up the gun. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that impossible?" End quote. September 28th, jury gets the case to deliberate. October 1st. So what do you think happened? Acquitted. When the verdict was read, spectators in the courtroom rose and shoved their way to Ward. Most of them were said to be women of fashionable Westchester. As the Palisadian newspaper of October 5th, 1923 would say, quote, "The moral of this remarkable case is that circumstantial evidence is a dangerous thing to trifle with." End quote. On the other side of the coin, Omaha Morning Bee, opinion piece, October 1st, 1923. Quote, "For months past, New York State has asked the question, can a rich man kill a poor man and get away with it? The answer, yes, was given yesterday by a jury. Respect for our jury system compels us all to call the verdict justified, but it causes thought. The accused man confessed the killing. He did not go on the stand or offer any defense, produce a single witness, except a speech by his lawyer who said Ward killed in self-defense a man attempting to blackmail him. He declined to give further information on the ground that it would disgrace his family. And the jury acquitted him. Reverse the case. Suppose the penniless sailor had murdered the rich man and said, 'I killed him in self-defense. He was acting in a way that would have disgraced my family. I decline to give any details. I desire to protect my family name. That's my story. Would the sailor have been acquitted? End quote. 1924, nothing really except stating that Westchester County had spent $80,000 trying to convict Ward. 1925, nothing. May 12, 1926, Walter Ward has disappeared, vanished without a trace. Ward's wife, Beryl, who has stood by her man, is leading the search. Her belief is that he was kidnapped or perhaps murdered by some nefarious people related to either the death of Clarence Peters or perhaps anything else he had been involved in. At the behest of Beryl, New Jersey Governor A. Harry Moore asked the New Jersey state law enforcement to look into Ward's disappearance. His car having been found in Trenton a week earlier with the windshield shattered by a large rock and his luggage in the back seat having been gone through. One source said he had left Baltimore for New York. And as days pass, of course, there are all kinds of theories. Some believe that he may have amnesia, and authorities are going around to hospitals between New York and Baltimore. His friends say that Ward has been having some headaches in recent days and suffering from fainting spells while on trial. But his wife? Not on board the amnesia choo-choo train. May 14th, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania was the recipient of 2 of Ward's suitcases. Philly police believed that Ward had been traced here before his car had been abandoned in Trenton. I say. May 31st, Beryl Ward has swerved a bit in her theory of her husband's disappearance. She believes he is alive and deliberately hiding, and well, he'll turn up soon enough. It would be 4 months before any new news, end of September, and you'll be hornswoggled. Ward was found. How? Well, on a tip from a lovely blonde Broadway gal named Phyllis. Ruh-roh. Yeah, Ward may have been acquitted of murder, but he ain't no innocent. Haven't we seen it time and time again? A young man with lots of family dough. LOL, they have a bakery. Pun not intended, but you're welcome. Anyway, young men not strapped for cash tend to get themselves into some scrapes. So let's start with Phyllis, who has been a so-called pet of the Twin Oaks Club. According to the Washington Times, Ward, quote, had quite an interest in the place. Platonic, gastronomic, economic, and Volstead tonic, end quote. Phyllis could usually be found by Ward's side when he wasn't involving himself with money and horse racing. Well, when Ward went out the proverbial back door, Dad George had his private eyes looking into Phyllis very closely. After Ward took a powder, or whatever that saying is, Phyllis showed her friends a telegraph from Pittsburgh signed Billy. Billy is Walter, according to Phyllis. The telegram had read, quote, "Sorry, Phyllis, you couldn't make the same train. Shall I wait here for you? Wire," end quote. Did Phyllis wire? Nobody cared, but she didn't go to Pittsburgh. So Private Eyes had a chit-chat with Phyllis and found out Ward had dyed his hair and was wearing glasses now, procuring several disguises that he had shown her, telling her, quote, "They'll never know me in these. You wouldn't know me either, girlie, would you, huh?" End quote. So where was he? Living alone on the Pacific coast after spending some of his money, his dad's money, and getting involved with crooked gamblers, women, and horses that weren't fast enough. October 27th, 1926. If Ward doesn't clear up his disappearance by November 15th, it may cost his family $35,000. Eldridge Peters, father of slain Clarence Peters, is suing for damages, and Ward has to show up in court for it. January 17th, 1927. Well. Ward's now in Cuba. To what now? Yeah, in Marianao, not far from Havana, apparently in his dad's house. Ward has no intention of coming back to the U.S. to face a suit for what is said now to be $50,000. Refuses to make a statement. Callers to the house are refused, as are phone calls. The ongoing theory is that Ward showed up in Cuba just the week before from New Orleans. If he doesn't attempt to defend the suit brought against him, a judgment by default may be entered against him, and he could be arrested, I guess, if he tries to come back to the U.S. September 14th, 1927. Beryl, has finally had enough of Ward's shenanigans. She's filed for divorce, citing desertion, infidelity, and failure to provide. Yeah? Check, check, and check. So what exactly has been going on since the acquittal? He was acquitted on September 28th, 1923, his birthday, and he rejoined his wife and children post-jail, post-trial, etc. But while technically free, he shied away from public places and seemed out of sorts over the stuff that came out during the trial. For example, one time he had disappeared. He had been playing the horses in Maryland while searches were conducted in the U.S. and Europe. May 5th, 1926, he was driving from Baltimore to his home in New York and disappeared. The damaged suit came about, and eventually Ward would be traced to Cuba. In the divorce suit, Beryl wants custody of the 2 children, and she does not name any names with regards to the infidelity charge. November 8th, 1927. Reno, our divorce capital of the U.S. at this time, granted Beryl her divorce on the allegation of desertion, and she gets custody of her children. And that's it. George Ward would pass away in 1940. Walter in 1946, still in Cuba. Whatever further secrets Ward was holding, he kept them tight to his vest, as I couldn't find anything about him in the newspapers. And due to the discretion of the newspapers in these days, whatever further nefarious things he participated in would also be kept hidden, and only insinuated. So what do you think? I tend to think Ward was doing a whole lot more than we can glean from the newspapers, and rather than face the civil charges brought up by the Peters family, he decided instead to leave his wife and family and left the country, rather than face up to it. I can get into the psychology of all of it. Was he feeling guilty for getting away with murder, or what? Who knows? The more you dig, the more it's a mystery. And I do like a mystery. See you.